Chapter 1. The 4 children were lying on the grass, and the prince went further and further into the forest, said the elder girl, till he came to a beautiful glade. A glade, you know, is a place in the forest that is open and green and lovely, and there he saw a lady, a beautiful lady with a long white dress that hung down to her ankles, with a golden belt and a golden crown. She was lying on the sward. Sward, you know, is grass as smooth as velvet, just like green velvet, and the prince saw the marks of travel on her garments. The bottom of the lovely silk dress was all dirty. "Wondrous fair, if you don't mind, you'll make that sheet dirty too," said Pin. "Shut up, will you?" answered her sister, who, carried away by her narrative, had approached her boots to some linen that was bleaching. "Yes, but Sarah'll be awfully cross if she has to wash it again," said Pin, who was practical. "You'll put me out altogether," cried Laura angrily. "Well, as I said, the edge of her robe was all muddy. No, I don't think I will say that. It sounds far prettier if it's clean. So it hung in long, straight, beautiful folds to her ankles, and the prince saw 2 little feet in golden sandals peeping out from under the hem of the silken gown, and—" "But what about the marks of travel?" asked Leppie. "Donkey! Haven't I said they weren't there? If I say they weren't, then they weren't. She hadn't travelled at all." "Oh, parakeets!" cried little Frank. 4 pairs of eyes went up to the bright green flock that was passing over the garden. "Now you've all interrupted, and I shan't tell any more," said Laura in a proud voice. "Oh, yes, please do, Wondrous Fair. Tell what happened next," begged Pin and Leppie. "No, not another word. You can only think of sheets and parakeets. Please, Wondrous Fair," begged little Frank. "No, I can't now. Another thing, I don't mind if you call me Laura today, as it is the last day." She lay back on the grass, her hands clasped under her head. A voice was heard, loud, imperative. "Laura, I want you. Come here." "That's Mother calling," said Pin. Laura kicked her heels. The 2 little boys laughed approval. "Go on, Laura," coaxed Pin. "Mother'll be angry. I'll come too." Laura raised herself with a grumble. "It's to try on that horrid dress." In very fact, Mother was standing, already somewhat impatient, with the dress in her hand. Laura wriggled out of the one she had on, and stood stiffly and ungraciously, with her arms held like pokers from her sides, while Mother, on her knees, arranged the length. "Don't put on a face like that, miss," she said sharply, on seeing Laura's air. "Do you think I'm making it for my own pleasure?" She had sewn at it all day, and was hot and tired. "It's too short," said Laura, looking down. "It's nothing of the kind," said Mother, whose mouth was full of pins. "It is. It's much too short." Mother gave her head a slight shake. "Don't you contradict me. Do you want to tell me I don't know what a length you're to wear in your dresses?" "I won't wear it at all if you don't make it longer," said Laura defiantly. Pin's chubby, featureless little face lengthened with apprehension. "Do let her have it just a teeny bit longer, Mother dear," she pleaded. "Now, Pin, what have you got to do with it, I'd like to know?" said Mother, on the verge of losing her temper over the back folds, which would not hang. "I'm going to school tomorrow, and it's a shame," said Laura, in the low, passionate voice that never failed to exasperate Mother, so different was it from her own hearty fashion of venting displeasure. Pin began to sniff in sheer nervous anxiety. "Very well, then, I won't do another stitch to it," said Mother, now angry in earnest, and got up and bounced out of the room. "Laura, how can you?" said Pin, dissolving. "It was only you who make her so cross." "I don't care," said Laura rebelliously, though she was not far off tears herself. "It is a shame. All the other girls will have dresses down to the tops of their boots, and they'll laugh at me and call me a baby." And touched by the thought of what lay before her, she too began to sniffle. She did not fail, however, to roll the dress up and to throw it into a corner of the room. She also kicked the ewer, which fell over and flooded the floor. Pin cried more loudly and ran to fetch Sarah. Laura returned to the garden. The two little boys came up to her, but she waved them back. "Leave me alone, children. I want to think." She stood in a becoming attitude by the garden gate, her brothers hovering in the background. Then Mother called once more. "Laura, where are you?" "Here, Mother. What is it?" "Did you knock this jug over, or did Pin?" "I did it, Mother." "Did you do it on purpose?" "Yes." "Come here to me." She went with lagging steps, but Mother's anger had passed. She was at work on the dress again, and by squinting her eyes Laura could see that a piece was being added to the skirt. She was penitent at once, and when Mother in a sorry voice said, "I'm ashamed of you, Laura, and on your last day, too," her throat grew narrow. "I didn't mean it, Mother." "If only you would ask properly for things, you would get them." Laura knew this, knew indeed that did she coax, Mother would refuse her nothing. But coaxing came hard to her. Something within her forbade it. Sarah called her high-stomached, to the delight of the other children and her own indignation. She had explained to them again and again what Sarah really meant. On leaving the house, she went straight to the flower beds. She would give Mother, who liked flowers very well but had no time to gather them, a bouquet quite the size of a cabbage. Pin and the boys were summoned to help her, and when their hands were full, Laura led the way to a secluded part of the garden on the farther side of the detached brick kitchen. In this strip, which was filled with greenery, little sun fell. 2 thick fir trees and a monstrous blue gum stood there. High bushes screened the fence. Jessamine climbed the wall of the house and encircled the bedroom windows, and on the damp and shady ground only violets grew. Yet with the love children bear to the limited and compact, the four had chosen their own little plots here, rather than in the big garden at the back of the house, and many were the times they had all begun anew to dig and to rake. But if Laura's energy did not fizzle out as quickly as usual, she was the model for the rest. Mother was sure to discover that it was too cramped and dark for them in there, and send Sarah to drive them off. Here, safely screened from sight, Laura sat on a bench and made up her bouquet. When it was finished, red and white in the center with a darker border, the whole surrounded by a ring of violet leaves, she looked about for something to tie it up with. Sarah, applied to, was busy ironing, and had no string in the kitchen, so Pin ran to get a reel of cotton. But while she was away, Laura had an idea. Bidding Leppy hold the flowers tight in both his sticky little hands, she climbed in at her bedroom window, or rather, by lying on the sill with her legs waving in the air, she managed to grab, without losing her balance, a pair of scissors from the chest of drawers. With these between her teeth, she emerged, to the excited interest of the boys who watched her open-mouthed. Laura had dark curls, Pin fair, and both of them wore them flopping at their backs, the only difference being that Laura, who was now 12 years old, had for the past year been allowed to bind hers together with a ribbon, while Pin's bobbed as they chose. Every morning, early, Mother brushed and twisted with a kind of grim pride these silky ringlets round her finger. Although the 5 odd minutes of the curling occupied were durance vile to Laura, the child was proud of her hair in her own way, and when in the street she heard someone say, "Look, what pretty curls!" she would give her head a toss and send them all a-rippling. In addition to this, there was a crowning glory connected to them. One hot December morning, when they had been tangled and Mother had kept her standing too long, she had fainted, pulling the whole dressing-table down about her ears, and ever since she had been marked off in some mysterious fashion from the other children. Mother would not let her go out at midday in summer. Sarah would say, "Let that be, can't you?" did she try to lift something that was too heavy for her, and the younger children were to be quelled by a threat to faint on the spot if they did not do as she wished. Laura's faint had become a byword in the family, and Laura herself held it for so important a fact in her life that she had more than once begun a friendship with the words, "Have you ever fainted? I have." From among these long glossy curls she now cut one of the longest and most spiral, cut it off close to the root, and with it bound the flowers together. Mother should see that she did know how to give up something she cared for, and was not as selfish as she was usually supposed to be. "Oh," said both little boys in a breath, then doubled up in noisy mirth. Laura was constantly doing something to set their young blood in amazement. They looked upon her as the personification of all that was startling and unexpected. But Pin, returning with a reel of thread, opened her eyes in a different way. "Oh, Laura!" she began, tearful at once. "Now, Reswar," retorted Laura scornfully. Reswar was Sarah's name for Pin, on account of her perpetual wateriness. "Be a cry-baby, do." But she was not dampened. She was lost in the pleasure of self-sacrifice. Pin looked after her as she danced off, then moved submissively in her wake to be near at hand should intercession be needed. Laura was so unsuspecting, and Mother would be so cross. In her dim, childish way, Pin longed to see these, her two nearest, at peace. She understood them both so well, and they had little or no understanding for each other, so she crept to the house at her sister's heels. Laura did not go indoors. Hiding against the wall of the flagged veranda, she threw her bouquet in at the window, meaning it to fall on Mother's lap. But Mother had dropped her needle, and was just lifting her face, flushed with stooping, when the flowers hit her thwack on the head. She groped again, impatiently to find out what had struck her, recognized the peace offering, and thought of the surprise cake that was going into Laura's box on the morrow. Then she saw the curl, and her face darkened. Was there ever such a tiresome child? What in the world would she do next? "Laura, come here directly." Laura had moved away. She was not expecting recognition. If Mother were pleased, she would call Pin to put the
Chapter 2. Laura, sleeping flat on her stomach, was roused next morning by Pin, who said, "Wake up, Wondrous Fair. Mother wants to speak to you. She says you can get into bed in my place before you dress." Pin slept warm and cozy at Mother's side. Laura rose on her elbow and looked at her sister. Pin was standing in the doorway holding her nightgown to her, in such a way as to expose all of her thin little legs. "Come on," urged Pin. "Sarah's going to give me my bath while you're with Mother." "Go 'way, Pin," said Laura snappily. "I told you yesterday you could say Laura, and you're more like a spider than ever." Spider was another nickname for Pin, owing to her rotund little body and mere sticks of legs. She was all belly, as Sarah put it, and the mere mention of it made Pin fly, for she was very touchy about her legs. As soon as the door closed behind her, Laura sprang out of bed and, waiting neither to wash herself nor to say her prayers, began to pull on her clothes, confusing strings and buttons in her haste, and quite forgetting that on this eventful morning she had meant to dress herself with more than ordinary care. She was just lacing her shoes when Sarah looked in. "Why, Miss Laura, don't you know your ma wants you?" "It's too late. I'm dressed now," said Laura darkly. Sarah shook her head. "Missis'll be fine and angry, and you needn't have had a row on your last day." Laura stole out of the door and ran down the garden to the summer-house. This, the size of a goodly room, was formed of a single dense, hairy-leafed tree, round the trunk of which a seat was built. Here she cowered, her elbows on her knees, her chin in her hands. Her face wore the stiff expression that went by the name of Laura's sulks, but her eyes were big and as watchful as those of a scared animal. If Sarah came to fetch her, she would hold on to the seat with both hands. But even if she had to yield to Sarah's greater strength, well, at least she was up and dressed. Not like the last time. About a week ago Mother had tried this kind of thing. Then she had been caught unawares. She had gone into Pin's warm place, curious and unsuspecting, and thereupon Mother had begun to talk seriously to her, and not with her usual directness. She had reminded Laura that she was growing up apace, and would soon be a woman, had told her that she must now begin to give up childish habits, and learn to behave in a modest and womanly way, all disagreeable, disturbing things, which Laura did not in the least want to hear. When it became clear to her what it was about, she had thrown back the bedclothes and escaped from the room. And since then she had been careful never to be long alone with Mother. But now half an hour went by, and no one came to fetch her. Her grim little face relaxed. She felt very hungry, too, and when at length she heard Pin calling, she jumped up and betrayed her hiding-place. "Laura! Laura, where are you? Mother says to come to breakfast, and not be silly. The coach'll be here in an hour." Taking hands, the sisters ran to the house. In the passage, Sarah was busy roping a battered tin box. With their own hands, the little boys had been allowed to paste on this a big sheet of note-paper, which bore, in Mother's writing, the words, Miss Laura Tweedle Rambotham, The Ladies' College, Melbourne. Mother herself was standing at the breakfast table cutting sandwiches. "Come and eat your breakfast, child," was all she said at the moment. "The tea's quite cold." Laura sat down and fell to with appetite, but also with a side glance at the generous pile of bread and meat growing under Mother's hands. "I shall never eat all that," she said ungraciously. It galled her still to be considered a greedy child with an insatiable stomach. "I know better than you do what you'll eat," said Mother. "You'll be hungry enough by this evening, I can tell you, not getting any dinner." Pin's face fell at this prospect. "Oh, Mother, won't she really get any dinner?" she asked, and to her soft little heart going to school began to seem one of the blackest experiences life held. "Why, she'll be in the train, stupid, how can she?" said Sarah. "Do you think trains give you dinners?" "Oh, Mother, please cut ever such a lot," begged Pin, sniffing valiantly. Laura began to feel somewhat moved herself at this solicitude, and choked down a lump in her throat with a gulp of tea. But when Pin had gone with Sarah to pick some nectarines, Mother's face grew stern, and Laura's emotion passed. "I feel more troubled about you than I can say, Laura. I don't know how you'll ever get on in life. You're so disobedient and self-willed. It would serve you very well right, I'm sure, for not coming this morning, if I didn't give you a penny of pocket-money to take to school." Laura had heard this threat before, and thought it wiser not to reply. Gobbling up the rest of her breakfast, she slipped away. With the other children at her heels, she made a round of the garden, bidding good-bye to things and places. There were the 2 summer houses, in which she had played house, in which she had cooked and eaten and slept. There was the tall fir-tree with the rung-like branches, by which she had been accustomed to climb to the very tree-top. There was the wilderness of bamboo and cane where she had been Crusoe, the ancient, broad-leaved cactus on which she had scratched their names and drawn their portraits. Here, the high aloe that had such a mysterious charm for you, because you never knew when the 100 years might expire and the aloe burst into flower. Here again was the old fig-tree with the rounded polished boughs, from which, seated as in a cradle, she had played Juliet to Pin's Romeo, and vice versa, but oftenest Juliet, for though Laura greatly preferred to be the ardent lover at the foot, Pin was but a poor climber, and, as she clung trembling to her branch, needed so much prompting in her lines, even then to repeat them with such feeble emphasis, that Laura invariably lost patience with her, and the love scene ended in a squabble. Passing behind a wooden fence which was a tangle of passion-flower, she opened the door of the fowl-house, and out strutted the mother-hen, followed by her pretty brood. Laura had given each of the chicks a name, and she now took Napoleon and Garibaldi up in her hand, and laid her cheek against their downy breasts, the younger children following her movements in respectful silence. Between the bars of the rabbit hutch she thrust enough green stuff to last the 2 little occupants for days, and everywhere she went she was accompanied by a legless magpie, which, in spite of its infirmity, hopped cheerily and quickly on its stumps. Laura had rescued it and reared it. It followed her like a dog, and she was only less devoted to it than she had been to a native bear which died under her hands. "Now listen, children," she said as she rose from her knees before the hutch. "If you don't look well after Maggie and the bunnies, I don't know what I'll do. The chicks'll be all right. Sarah'll take care of them, 'cause of the eggs. But Maggie and the bunnies don't have eggs, and if they're not fed, or if Frank treads on Maggie again, then they'll die. Now, if you let them die, I don't know what I'll do to you. Yes, I do. I'll send the devil to you at night when the room's dark, before you go to sleep. So there." "How can you if you're not here?" asked Leppie. Pin, however, who believed in ghosts and apparitions with all her fearful little heart, promised tremulously never, never to forget. But Laura was not satisfied until each of them in turn had repeated, in a low voice, with the appropriate gestures, the sacred secret and forbidden formula. "Is my finger wet? Is my finger dry? God'll strike me dead if I tell a lie." Then Sarah's voice was heard calling, and the boys went out into the road to wait for the coach. Laura's dressing proved a lengthy business, and was accomplished amid bustle and scolding, and little peacemaking words from Pin. For in her hurry that morning Laura had forgotten to put on the clean linen Mother had laid beside the bed, and consequently had now to strip to the skin. The boys announced the coming of the coach with shrill cries, and simultaneously the rumble of wheels was heard. Sarah came from the kitchen drying her hands, and Pin began to cry. "Now shut up, Resver," said Sarah roughly. Her own eyes were moist. "You don't see Miss Laura be such a silly Billy. Anyone 'ud think you was goin', not her." The ramshackle old vehicle, one of Cobb's Royal Mail coaches, big-bodied, lumbering, scarlet, pulled by 2 stout horses, drew up before the door, and the driver climbed down from his seat. "Now, good day to you, ma'am. Good day, miss." This to Sarah, who, picking up the box, handed it to him to be strapped on under the apron. "Well, well, and so the little girl's going to school, is she? My, but time flies. Well do I remember the day, ma'am, when I drove you all across for the first time. These children wasn't big enough then to git up and down by themselves. Now I warrant you they can. Just look at 'em, will you? But my, ain't you ashamed of yourself?" He spoke to Pin. "Pipe in your eye like that? Why, you'll flood the road if you don't hold on. Yes, yes, ma'am, bless you. I'll look after her, and put her into the train wid me own hands. Don't you be uneasy. The Lord he cares for the widder and the orphan, and if he don't, why, Patrick O'Donnell does." This was O'Donnell's standing joke. He uttered it with a loud chuckle. While speaking, he had let down the steps and helped the 3 children up. They were to ride with Laura to the outskirts of the township. The little boys giggled excitedly at his assertion that the horses would not be equal to the weight. Only Pin wept on in undiminished grief. "Now, Miss Laura." "Now, Laura, Good-bye, darling, and do try and be good. And be sure you write once a week, and tell me everything, whether you are happy, and if you get enough to eat, and if you have enough blankets on your bed. And remember always to change your boots if you get your feet wet. And don't lean out the window in the train." For some time past Laura had had need of all her self-control, not to cry before the children. As the hour drew near, it had grown harder and harder. While dressing, she had resorted to counting the number of times the profile of a Roman emperor appeared in the flowers on the wallpaper. Now the worst moment of all was come, the moment of good-bye. She did not look at Pin, but she heard her tireless, snuffly weeping, and set her own lips tight. "Yes, mother. No, mother," she answered shortly. "I'll be all right. Good-bye." She could not, however, restrain a kind of dry sob which jumped up her throat. When she was in the coach, Sarah, whom she had forgotten, climbed up to kiss her, and there was some joking between O'Donnell and the servant while the steps were being folded and put away. Laura did not smile. Her thin little face was very pale. Mother's heart went out to her in a pity which she did not know how to express. "Don't forget your sandwiches, and when you're alone, feel in the pocket of your ulster, and you'll find something nice. Good-bye, darling." "Good-bye. Good-bye." The driver had mounted to his seat. He unwound the reins, cried, "Get up!" to the two burly horses. The vehicle was set in motion and trundled down the main street. Until it turned the corner by the Shire Gardens, Laura let her handkerchief fly from the window. Sarah waved hers, then wiped her eyes and lustily blew her nose. Mother only sighed. "It was all she could do to keep up," she said as much to herself as to Sarah. "I do hope she'll be all right. She seems such a child to be sending off like this. Yet what else could I do? To a state school, I've always said it, my children shall never go. Not if I have to beg the money to send them elsewhere." But she sighed again, in spite of the energy of her words, and stood gazing at the place where the coach had disappeared. She was still a comparatively young woman, and straight of body, but trouble, poverty, and night watches had scored many lines on her forehead. "Don't you worry," said Sarah. "Miss Laura'll be all right. She's just a bit too clever. Brains for two, that's what it is. And children will grow up and get big, and change their feathers." She spoke absently, drawing her metaphor from a brood of chickens which had strayed across the road, and was now trying to mount the wooden veranda. "Shoo! Get away with you." "I know that, but Laura, the other children have never given me a moment's worry. But Laura's different. I seem to get less and less able to manage her. If only her father had been alive to help." "I'm sure no father livin' could do more than you for those blessed children," said Sarah with impatience. "You think of nothing else. It'd be a great deal better if you took more care o' yourself. You sit up nights and don't get no proper sleep slavin' away at that blessed embroidery and stuff, so as Miss Laura can get off to school and to her books. and then you want to worry over her as well. She'll be all right. Miss Laura's like peas. You've got to get 'em out of the pod. They're in there, sure enough. And besides, I guess school'll knock all the nonsense out of her." "Oh, I hope they won't be too hard on her," said Mother in quick alarm. "Shut the side gate, will you? Those children have left it open again. And, Sarah, I think we'll turn out the drawing-room." Sarah grunted to herself as she went to close the gate. This had not entered into her scheme of work for the day, and her cooking was still undone. But she did not gainsay her mistress, as she otherwise would have made no scruple of doing, for she knew that nothing was more helpful to the latter in a crisis than hard manual work. Besides, Sarah herself had a sneaking weakness for what she called drawing-room days. For the drawing-room was the storehouse of what treasures had remained over from a past prosperity. It was crowded with bric-a-brac and ornament, and as her mistress took these objects up one by one to dust and polish them, she would, if she were in a good humour, tell Sarah where and how they had been bought, or describe the places they had originally come from, so that Sarah, pausing, broom in hand, to listen, had with time gathered some vague ideas of a country like India, for example, whence came the little silver pagodi, and the expressionless brass god, who squatted vacantly and at ease.